Grüß, willkommen in einem Aufregens video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 28 of my figure gaming video series. In this video, I'll investigate basing 6mm Napoleonics and ancient figures. The main objective is to determine the optimal basing system, which is both practical and looks good. A few caveats for this video. While this video does in theory cover ancients as well as Napoleonic, the main focus is Napoleonic. When I originally created this video, I had not completed any basing of any of my Napoleon figures. As a result, all the images of Napoleon figures have come from the internet. They are not my figures. However, I have based a 6mm Napoleonic army since creating this video. This video is based on my research on how to base Napoleonic figures, which is why I use images from the internet. It was this research that allowed me to determine my current basing system, and I'm going to share you the results of that research. In order to assist me, I used an early attempt to base 6mm ancients to assist me in determining what looks the best. I've made many errors in the past with 6mm ancient figures, and I wanted to avoid any issues with my Napoleonic figures, which I did. However, saying all that, that is my main focus is Napoleonics, the observations made in this video is applicable to ancients. My other caveat is that I do not pretend to have a perfect solution, and a player will need to decide their optimal basing based on the rules they want to use. I normally use rules which allow me to refight entire battles from Leipzig to Cannae. Thus I have different objectives to someone who wishes to only command, let's say, a French brigade, form line, column or square. So anyway, now on to my basing observations. There are many different basing systems which suit different rules for 6mm. The primary basing metric is the base width, which can range from 2 cm wide to 6 cm wide, and in some rare cases even larger than that. The depth is highly variable, and many rules don't really care about the depth. This is often left up to the player to decide. This decision could be critical in some cases. If we look at a standard 4 cm wide by 1.5 cm deep base at the top, we can either base the 6mm figures in one or two ranks. This shows a maximum density of 8 figures wide, which I find is a bit tight, but is a standard basing density for close order. I sometimes base 5 wide for my ancients, but this is because the heroic and Ross figures comes in strips of 5. With Bacchus, I try for the ideal density of 2 figures per 1 cm. I normally use a base depth, at least for me, of 2 cm rather than 1.5 cm and spread my lines out a bit more as I feel this looks better. I do this for both Napoleonics and ancients, and generally I find it has no major rules impact. The first observation that I had when I did my research is 2 ranks look a lot better than 1 rank. This shows what this looks like, and 2 ranks is optimal for 6mm, if not more. I tried 2 ranks for my 15mm, and I didn't like the effect because it was too compressed. However, if you increase element size, it also looks better. But for 6mm, it's absolutely the best density and does look best. For light infantry, when in skirmish mode or skirmishes, I use 8 figures and spread them around. I still use a 2 cm deep base in this case. Using the same base size, we can fit 6 cavalry in a single rank. This does depend on the figures, and it's possible to place cavalry on a 1.5 cm deep base, but in order to align with my infantry, I always go with a 2 cm deep base. Skirmish base typically uses a deeper base, but similar number of figures. For artillery, I also use a 2 cm deep base, but this image that you see here shows a 3 cm deep base. In either case, you probably need 2 guns per base. For horse artillery, I will use the same density of guns, but I'll often place a horse on the base to indicate that it's horse artillery. In the past, I used to base all my commanders on a standard square base, but now I've adopted the round base idea. It does work better, I find, but depends on the rules. I use a 2 cm base for sub-commanders and 3 cm base for C&C, but the size is irrelevant and players should use the base size they prefer. Bigger allows them to put more diorama on it, for example. What I've shown you is a reasonable strategy for basing 6mm figures on a standard 4cm wide base. However, as I already possess a large 15mm force mix, I determined there was no point going down this path for me. Now, if you don't have a 15mm force mix, then this is a viable option, either for Ancients or Napoleonics. But if you already do, and they're 4cm wide bases or something similar, you may be tempted to try something a bit different. So, if you don't possess a 15mm force mix and wish to only purchase a 6mm force mix and you want to use 4cm wide bases, then you can pretty much use all the standard rules out there: DBMM, DBM, DBA, DBN, you name it. And you can use 6mm instead of 15mm figures. However, as I indicated, if you do already have a standard 15mm based army, then for 6mm, you may not be using the full potential of going down the 6mm path if you simply copy 15mm basing. So let's try and look at some other possible basing systems. I decided to try 6cm wide bases, which is a basing system used by a series of popular rules for 6mm. My initial thought was 2cm deep bases, but as you can see here, a 3cm deep base is used in order to give you a bit more diorama. If you do go down the 3cm deep base, there are large gaps when you put them all together, which is not noticed when the bases are in line, but is quickly noticed when the bases form up a column. Still, this is dependent on the rules, and with the rules I use, it's not an issue. One option is to increase the depth of the base so you can add other features on your base as well, or maybe spread out the lines a bit on your base so you don't get this sort of gap effect. However, when we look at cavalry, maybe the issue is a bit too difficult to overcome. This example shows cavalry en masse. The gaps between the lines, if you use a 3cm deep base, can be off-putting for some players. I tend not to mind. Again, it really does depend on the rules that you use. One benefit of the additional depth is you can place skirmishers in front of the line and achieve a much nicer looking base. If the rules are big battle sets of rules, this works extremely well because you're not really forming columns in that case. Finally, if you increase the depth, you can standardize on a single base size for everything. In this case, the additional depth is being used to represent skirmish cavalry. I find having a single base size to be rather good and a benefit, particularly if you're playing big battle sets of rules. If you want to really go all out, you can go to a 6cm square, and that way you can place skirmishers in front of your twin line, which looks realistic. I find this looks really good. Other options for this kind of base size is to form two columns on your deep base, again with a few skirmishers. This works really well with large-scale rules, where each base represents, let's say, 2 battalions, or even more than that. However, while I really like this 6cm square idea, I found the larger bases limited me to a style of rules that I didn't really use, did not enjoy too much, the abstract big base system. Nonetheless, if you do enjoy these large base rules, then the larger bases give you the opportunity to place dice-based strength markers as well as other types of markers on them. One other set of rules that these work quite well with is board game conversions into figure gaming formats. But when you go to a 6cm base size, you need a fairly large playing area in order to start reproducing something like Waterloo, etc. Going back to the big base sets of rules such as Blucher, you can create bases like this. Now these bases are actually 7.5cm square. This shows some possible formations you can place on the base, and it allows you to put markers and dice spots, etc. on it in order for you to keep track of strength points, morale, etc. of your particular base. After looking at these larger bases and then rejecting it, I then swung back to a smaller base, in this case a 2cm wide base. These are 2cm squares, and after trying 2cm by 1cm bases, I find these much easier to pick up. I use a 3mm thick base, which again makes it easier to pick up. Now I had a bad experience with 2cm wide, 1cm deep base 6mm ancient armies, which I never want to repeat again. So doing a 2cm square kind of overcomes the issues I had, and it's a viable option. Going down the 2 centimeters square, this shows these bases in column. The 2 centimeters square strategy allows you to use the size of your figures to assist with the game itself. These bases allow you to have larger battles or use a much smaller playing area, which is a real plus for some players. While I think the 2 centimeters square is a viable path to go down, I've found very few players have gone down this direction. I'm uncertain why, but perhaps the elements end up being too fiddly to play with, which is probably a viable criticism. However, one advantage of going down the 2 centimeter bases, you can still construct your 4 centimeter bases and even 6 centimeter bases. I use movement trays a lot, but if using movement trays, your elements tend to be 1 centimeter wider than they really are during the lip on the movement tray. If that is not an issue, then what you can do is base your force mixers on 2 centimeter square bases, use a movement tray that allows you to deploy either 4 centimeter wide elements or 6 centimeter wide elements or whatever you want, and just go for it. I'm uncertain if this is the correct course to adopt, but I've decided on a 3 centimeter square base for Napoleonics. This happens to be the size of my World War II bases, and I know, or 6mm World War II bases, and I know they work well, so that's what I'll duplicate because I know the risk is low. This shows up here a line, light and skirmish element on the left. Light infantry is based in the same manner as line infantry but has a different uniform. Since I've created this video, I have actually based my figures accordingly, and you can see some, unfortunately not particularly in focus, figures on the right. This shows my proposed cavalry, both heavy and light, on the top. At the bottom is an element of skirmish cavalry, which I have to admit I have yet to need for any of the rules I'm currently using. The way I determine if something is light or heavy is the troop type. So on the right you'll see an image of hussars. They are light cavalry. Finally, and certainly not least, is the artillery. On the right you can see foot artillery at the top and horse artillery at the bottom. I typically put a horse figure on the artillery base to indicate if it's horse. This generally represents all the troops I need. Superior ordinary infantry troop types are indicated by the figure itself, so I don't need to do anything special with the basing. I'm now going to cover what a player may need to purchase. A quick note, this is based on my focus on refighting entire battles, so may not be suitable for those players who wish to refight, let's say, brigade or a divisional level. This shows a typical building block, which is loosely based on the DBM army list. In this case, this represents a corps of which I would normally field between 4 and 6 in a typical game. If you decide to purchase 6 corps, you will not be fielding all these elements on a table at every single game, but you may in some extreme examples. As Bucker's foot comes in multiples of 96 and 48 figures, 96 figures gives you 6 elements of line infantry and 48 figures give you 3 elements of line infantry. If they are skirmish, then you get 16 and 8 elements respectively. A typical force mix should have a minimum of 36 elements of foot, some of which would be light foot and some which would be grenadiers. Thus you need a minimum of 6 packets. 1 packet would be grenadiers and 2 would be light. At a maximum you need an extra 3 packets of foot. Anything beyond that is simply wasted. You'll never deploy it on the playing area at once. You would only need 1 packet of skirmishers, although this does depend on the rules you are using and also the nationality that you're fielding. Bucker's cavalry comes in multiples of 45, which means you get 11 elements per packet. If you base your elements 5 to a base, it drops to 6 elements, 9 elements. Extra cavalry is also always useful on commander bases. These days I base 6 per element, so I get even less elements than this. As a typical force mix contains no more than 8 to 12 elements of cavalry, you do not need much cavalry. 1 packet of heavy and 1 of light is all you really need, although I normally get a few more, or 1 more. It makes me think the density should be closer to 5 per base. That's at least what my thought was when I did this. As it turned out, I went down the 6 per base density, and I think that works really well. Artillery comes in multiples of 4, so this gives you 4 elements of artillery. A typical force mix should have between 8 and 12 elements of artillery, so 2 packets of foot, and 1 of horse is all you really need. That is foot and horse artillery. Commanders come in multiple of 15, as a typical force mix should have no more than 4 to 6 sub-commanders, apart from the C&C. You probably only need one packet. Some of the foot will go into line infantry. I'd also get one packet of limbers. These can be used to indicate horse artillery element if you want to go down that particular path. This means the total armour should consist of as few as 11 packets and no more than 18 packets of figures. This will probably have a cost of between £66 and £120. It's not cheap, but not over the top either. Of course, the bases, of which I use 3mm thick MDF, will need to be factored in as well. If you're spending £100, don't skimp on basing. You will regret it. If you wish to use 6cm square or 6cm wide basing, simply place 2 of these 3cm squares together. I can even achieve the deep bases by using 4 elements, as you can see on the right. 2 skirmishers at the front, 2 line at the back. This shows some of my old Heroic and Ross Ancient 6mm figures. At this stage, I was basing 5 figures wide, as Heroic and Ross offered 5 figure strips. For Napoleonics, as I've already shown, I'll be using Bacchus and I'll be using 3 ranks of 4 figures as I feel this looks better. In fact, it kind of looks like a battalion. This shows my old ancient cavalry. In this case, I went for 3 per base. For Napoleonics, I went down the 2 ranks of 3 figures. Once again, because I feel this looks better, I can also confirm the cavalry does fit on the base just. Incidentally, by basing 2 ranks, that actually depicts the way cavalry was used. And for the infantry in 3 ranks, that depicts the way most infantry was used. So there's a bit of a historical link there. Totally unintentional. Mixing and matching these 3cm square bases can create some interesting combinations. In this case, the javelin are in front of my phalangites. Thus, if I use larger elements using movement trays, I can create some nice effects if I went down this particular path. For Napoleonic, well, I didn't actually, but for Napoleonics it does work. You could create 6cm squared bases, line at the back, skirmish at the front. After creating this video, I changed my basing for ancients to what you see here. In this case, all elements are 3 cm wide, with infantry 1 cm deep, cavalry and artillery 2 cm deep, chariots and elephant typically 3 cm deep. I did this because of the rules I was using, and I suspect any set of ancient rules would have the same issue. Ancients does not really favour square bases. In my case, I needed to mix different troop types together, which is possible if I base it according to this, in movement trays, in this case 1 cm wide movement tray. This also allows me to use these figures for DBMM, DBM, DBA, and probably pretty much every other set of ancient rules that you can purchase today. So it's probably the best way to go for ancients at least. However, swinging back to Napoleonics, my current focus is on a 3 cm square base. It's taken me a long time to arrive at this, and I must admit in the future I may discover it's not optimal and I may consider rebasing. I really hope I don't. However, the advantage with this basing is, with movement trays, I can also use these bases for rules such as Blucher. I have to admit the other option, which I'm still vaguely thinking about in the back of my head, is the 2 cm square base, mainly Napoleonics only. Many years ago, in the mid-1980s to be exact, I based up a Roman and ancient British army using 2 cm wide bases, but found the figures too fiddly because the depth was 1 cm. By moving to a 2 cm square base, I may avoid the fiddly issue. One benefit of a 2 cm square base is I can pair them up to give me a 4 cm wide base, so I can game against players who use that basing system as well. As the only players with 6mm figures on 4 cm bases I know has an ancient army, I may go down that path for ancients, perhaps, although I think the system that I've selected is optimal. And as for Napoleonics, I don't actually know anyone with a 6mm Napoleonic army that's based on 4 cm wide bases, but if everyone comes up, it's certainly an option for me to think about in the future. However, apart from all this musing on different alternate systems for Napoleonics, I'm currently determined to stay with 3 cm square bases. This, I have to admit, is ancients, but nonetheless they're 3 cm square. On the right is a CNC. Now, when I based these figures a long time ago, I was still using square command elements. I moved to circles, as it makes identifying a commander easier. I really strongly advise anyone who wishes to base individual command elements to use circular bases so you can identify them very rapidly. For DBMM and DBM and stuff like that, where the commander is based in with the element, different story. But if you're using other sets of rules where the commanders are separate, put them on a circular base, otherwise you'll just lose them in your army. And so we come to an end of episode 28 of my figure base gaming hobby series of videos, in this case basing 6mm Napoleonics and to a lesser extent ancient figures. Once I have got my buck of 6mm Napoleonics and I've painted it and based it up as I've indicated here, and I think it works really well. Although a couple of interesting musing about it. I did this so I could create more, a bigger battle on a smaller playing area. As it turned out, after I did this, I started basing my 15mm using US basing, which is 2 centimeters wide, 3 deep. And I found I could achieve the same level of density that I was seeking with 6mm. So I'm beginning to think maybe I never needed to go down the 6mm path. Nonetheless, I can still use these in movement trays for rules such as Bitchute or other Napoleonic rules which require 6 centimeter wide bases. Anyway, one thing that I've learnt is that no matter how certain I am about something, something will pop up that will destroy or pop my bubble. Alle guten Dingen kommen zu einem Ende.